Why does the Archaeological Survey of India believe that there existed a Shiva temple at the site of the Gyanvapi Mosque? Is its case irrefutable and watertight? And what is the significance and secret of the two graves that have been found in the western area of that structure? Hello and welcome to Up North. Today we are going to talk about the Gyanvapi Masjid, the history of the dispute, what the Archaeological Survey of India has said about the structure, and especially the significance of the two graves that have been found in the structure in an area which could have been the sanctum sanctorum of an earlier holy shrine of the Hindus. But before we do that, let's assume for a moment that we have somehow gained access to a time travel machine. And taking advantage of that, let's travel to Banaras, the holy city on the banks of the Ganga, in the year 1675. Because that is the year when Aurangzeb, after having imprisoned his father and decimated his brothers, is about to complete 20 years in power. And not just that, he is also about to destroy an ancient temple that existed in Banaras and about to order the construction of a mosque which is now called Ganvapi Mosque. Before we proceed, let me explain the meaning of the term Gyanvapi and the history of this dispute and why it has reached a court. According to the Hindus, there is a well in the Kashi Vishwanath temple which is adjacent to the Gyanvapi Mosque. According to the priests and locals, this well is called the well of knowledge, that is Gyan, and that is why this site is called Gyanvapi. But the Muslims say the story is slightly different. According to them, Aurangzeb's brother Dara Shikoh completed his study of Indian scriptures and holy texts at this site and attained Gyan. That is why it is called Gyanvapi. According to the Hindus, there existed an ancient temple dedicated to Lord Shiva at the site of the mosque. They believe that this temple was first destroyed by Muhammad Ghori during one of his many invasions of India. Later on, a mosque was constructed at this site by Razia Sultan, the first and last woman ruler of Delhi's Sultanate. Later on, Akbar's Navratna, Raja Todarmal, who was the revenue minister in Akbar's Darbar and is also known as one of the pioneers of modern revenue system, constructed a temple again at this site. This story took another turn in 1675 probably, according to Hindus, when Aurangzeb ordered the destruction of the temple that existed and asked for the construction of a mosque here, which is now called the Gyanvapi Mosque. The Hindus have been arguing that the temple be restored and the site be handed over back to them, and this dispute reached a court a few months ago, and the court asked the Archaeological Survey of India to conduct a forensic examination of the site and the structure without in any way changing the nature of the site or the structure. So as you might be aware, the Archaeological Survey of India submitted its report to the court a few days ago, and it has concluded that there existed a Hindu temple there. Its findings are based on 3 points, and I will explain to you these 3 points and also try and understand whether these arguments in favor of a temple are irrefutable or they can be challenged. If they can be challenged, why? And also obviously the most important point about the two graves that exist there, and especially why these graves are in the western direction of the temple. Before we proceed, I would like you to take a look at this map that I put up on the screen for you. This map has been drawn by the ASI and has been submitted to the court for its perusal and in accordance with the court's order that they carry out a survey of the Gyanvapi Mosque or the structure that exists there. And while you look at that map, remember that temples in India were always built on the east-west axis, which means you enter the temple from the east gate, proceeded towards the west, and the deity always faced the east, because as we know in the Hindu traditions, the gods always face the easterly direction, which is the direction of the sun. Now imagine for a moment you are entering this structure which is a temple and you are walking from the eastern gate towards the western direction. What will you observe? When you look at the map, the eastern side would be the side facing you and the western side would be the side facing away from you. So when you enter the existing structure from the eastern side, you will come across a central chamber which is huge. On its left is a chamber, on its right is a chamber, and behind it are remains of a chamber that once existed. Now according to the ASI, these chambers exists from the original structure which according to them was a temple. And I'm quoting from the ASI report. This temple had a big central chamber and at least one chamber to the north, south, east and west respectively. Remains of 3 chambers to the north, south and west still exist, but the remains of the chamber to the east and any further extension of it could not be ascertained physically, as the area is covered under a platform with stone flooring. Basically, it means that the ASI couldn't prove the existence of the eastern chamber because it has been covered with concrete and turned into a platform, and there are some remains which suggest that there was also a western chamber. According to the ASI, the central chamber is of the pre-existing structure. Similarly, the southern and northern chambers are also of the pre-existing structure, which according to the ASI was a temple. That brings us to the western chamber and its walls. According to the ASI, the eastern half of the western chamber still exists, whereas the superstructure of western half has been destroyed. Also, the western wall of the existing structure is the remaining part of a pre-existing Hindu temple. Now, according to the ASI, all these chambers had an opening in all the 4 directions. These were decorated arched entrances, and now the entrance towards the west have been blocked. Now, what does this mean? I will try and explain from my understanding of temples and Hindu traditions. As I told you earlier, all Indian temples were built on the east-west axis. The devotee entered the temple from the east, made their way through a central courtyard or a central chamber and proceeded towards the sanctum sanctorum of the temple, which was always to the west. And in this existing structure, the western chamber has been partly destroyed, primarily because it could have been the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. But all other chambers exist in the way they were, along with some of the inscriptions and floral decorations on the walls and pilasters. And you will actually be surprised that when you complete your journey, you will actually run into 2 graves. What is the significance of these graves? Why were they dug up in the structure which ASI believes was a temple dedicated to Lord Shiva? Some of you may have already guessed the reason. As I told you, the western chamber was the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. And to make it impure, to make it ineligible for construction of a temple in the future or installation of a deity, 2 graves were probably dug up to make this place especially inauspicious for a temple. This could have been the design behind turning the western chamber into a mini graveyard. So these structures, according to the ASI, conclusively prove that there was a pre-existing temple there. There are 2 other evidences which the ASI has submitted to the court. One is the markings on the walls and the pillars of the temple. According to the ASI, most of these walls and pillars have 2 symbols. One of them is of the swastika, which, as you know, is considered holy by the Hindus, and the other is of a trident or a trishul, which is considered a mark of Lord Shiva. The other evidence, which is considered irrefutable, comes from the cellars that have been found in the basement of the existing structure. Now, as you might be aware, there are 3 architectural styles which are generally found all across India. One of them is the Hindu style, the other is the Islamic style, and the third is the Indo-Saracen style, which was implemented by the British by mixing the Hindu and Islamic architectural styles. But the cellars in the basement, they are of the Hindu architectural style, which conclusively proves, according to ASI, that there existed a Hindu structure prior to the construction of a mosque there. And on the basis of these 3 evidences, the ASI believes its case is foolproof in favor of a temple. Now, whether the ASI is arguing its case logically and conclusively, it is for the courts to decide. But the Muslim side, the mosque side, has been arguing that the existence of markings and inscriptions do not conclusively prove that it was a Hindu site. They believe that because the masons and the laborers who worked on these sites were from every religion, they might have marked their names and figures in accordance with their faith. In this context, I must remind you that Indian Parliament had passed a law which forbids change in the nature and structure of any religious site that has existed in India since 1947. As things stand today, the Gyanvapi Mosque is covered by that law, and only if that law is overruled or changed, the Hindu side can argue that the site be handed over back to them and a Shiva's temple be constructed there. Obviously, this case would be fought not just in the courts but also in Indian Parliament. So this then, friends, was my short explainer on the Gyanvapi Mosque and the map that has been submitted by the ASI to the court. Now, whether the ASI case in favor of a temple is foolproof or not, that is for the courts to decide. But as far as this report is concerned, ASI is convinced that there existed a temple there and it is a watertight case based on the inscriptions and finally on the basis of the cellars that have been discovered in the underground of the mosque. And because of these Hindu architectural structures, the ASI is convinced that there used to be a temple there. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.